Well, that was the scene in the north end of Toronto this morning after another fatal shooting in the city. The victim's name has not yet been released, nor has any information about possible suspects. But this is the 26th deadly shooting in Toronto this year alone. Well, the shooting comes on the heels of a scathing letter sent by a veteran Toronto police sergeant to Mayor John Tory. The officer accused the mayor of contributing to the city's gun violence by cancelling an anti-violence strategy in 2016. For more on this and the greater issue, we're now joined by Joseph Smith. He is the co-founder of the nonprofit organization Generation Chosen in Toronto. So, Joseph, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, obviously this is something that people are talking about in Toronto, but in other parts of the country as well, that experience gun violence. And I want to begin as a starting point, that email that we talked about from that veteran police officer, because if you go through that email, he says that John Tory, the mayor, has contributed to the violence by taking funding away from a guns and gangs program called TAVIS and also cutting the police budget in Toronto. What's your reaction to that criticism?
I find it interesting given that when situations like the one we're experiencing currently with the spate of violence reaping through the city, we often have a reactive and visceral reaction to it. And in that sense, we want to be punitive and we want to crush out and stomp out all the gangs and the thugs that are doing things that they're doing. But we don't look at the long-term effects. So we need to have a bit of more of a rehabilitative and supportive approach to dealing with the communities from which these young men come from. You can't stop bad behavior by simply reprimanding a person in the moment. You have to actually fix the conditions within the environment that individual comes from. Well,
let's break that down, because as you say, this is a greater debate more than just about increasing police budgets.
Exactly.
But you are talking about investments elsewhere. Where would you put those investments?
You would have to, first and foremost, put some of the investments into grassroots and community organizations that are dealing primarily with the psychosocial ramifications of pretty much community neglect. Communities like the ones I serve in Jane and Finch, they've been neglected politically and socially for decades. And the result of that is family breakdown, a lack of job opportunities, and a lack of internship, co-op opportunities. So you have to deal with the programs that are passionate and willing and able to do the kind of work to build up the next generation that would want to be contributing members of society. So concretely then, what would you be looking at? Well, you'd probably have to first put a large amount of funding into those grassroots organizations and programming like Generation Chosen, like the one we operate. You'd also have to put money into educational programs that are after school and that focus on things like financial literacy, civic engagement, budgeting, saving, employability, job preparedness, things of that nature, so that the youth of tomorrow can actually feel that past 18 they have future prospects, something to do and look forward to. It's interesting as you say this. I'm actually thinking about your own personal story. Yeah. That's, I've benefited. I was looking at your background through the research that I had before this interview. And it talked about how when you were a young man, a boy, you saw your own friend shot and killed. But your life took a different path. What made the difference for you? So first and foremost, gun violence within the community I come from is a perennial feature of everyday life, especially for young black males. And not only did I see my friend murdered, I saw another young man who was about 25 when I was about 8 or 9 get shot in the back of his head. And things like that stay with you, the trauma and the aftermath that stays with you. But luckily I had my mother, of course, which is a supportive figure, and then a teacher who got me involved in a program called the ACE program, which takes at-risk students from grade 11, brings them up to York University, and has them conduct or sit alongside first university students to get a university credit, to let them see that the future and the life that you could have outside of your community is promising. So, it's interesting as well, because you're talking about this mentorship program that made a difference for you. But mentorship, to me, that also talks about employment, that talks about education opportunities, it talks about before school, after school programs. And as we talk about all these things that are needed as investments, as you're putting out there, do other levels of government have to get involved? Because right now the debate about gun violence is very much at the community level and the mayor's office and the police office. Does it need to be more than that? Absolutely. It has to be a provincial mandate. It has to be something that we look at for all Ontarians, because it affects the lives of all Ontarians. No one's insulated from injustice. And what we see happening in certain pockets of the city will spill over and affect other people in other communities. And to an extent, that's what we're seeing, because people are reacting right now because 2 people were shot last weekend in the heart of the downtown, very popular tourist area and club area in Toronto. Exactly, and this is cyclical. This has happened in '91, this has happened in 2005, and we're going to continue to see repeat acts of these kinds of violence if we don't look at the root causes and what's the contributing factors of what's leading to them presently.
Joseph, I wish we had more time, but
Me
I
too.
really appreciate you coming today. I
No
appreciate
problem.
the conversation.
Thank you, me too.
Okay, and that is Joseph Smith, the co-founder and also a youth mentor with Generation Chosen, a nonprofit organization in Toronto.